Good morning, buenos días. I'm Izzy Ventura Meda, Executive Director of Familias and Acción. Welcome to our 12th annual Latino Health Equity Conference. Today's conference aims to broaden our knowledge and awareness on sexual health, sexuality, and HIV in the Latino community. I would like to acknowledge that Familias en Acción is in Portland, Oregon, and Multnomah County, the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Clackamas, Clackamas, Tumwater, Tualatin Kalapuya, Wasco, Molalla, Cowlitz, and Watlala bands of the Chinook, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. Familias en Acción recognizes that colonization of this land is ongoing, and that the intergenerational grief and historical trauma reverberate in the lives of Indigenous communities. Because of this, Familias en Acción strives to provide relevant support and care when called upon by these communities. At Familias en Acción, we acknowledge not just the land we are on, but also the work that must be done to rectify this harm and support the work of local Indigenous organizations and communities to heal. Familias en Acción is proud to present our 12th annual Latino Health Equity Conference, Me Cuido, Te Cuido. Me Cuido, Te Cuido prioritizes one's health, the health of one's partner, and that of the community. This perspective cultivates and promotes values of mutual respect, acceptance, equality, and empathy. This year's Latino Health Equity Conference aims to broaden our knowledge and awareness on sexual health, sexuality, and HIV by leveraging the experiences of the Latino community. We will highlight community-driven initiatives that prevent new HIV infections, support Latinos living with HIV, and work towards ending cultural stigmas that impact Latino health. Conversations around sexual health and HIV can be sensitive or challenging, and we encourage you to take any breaks when needed today. We also have health resources available to you virtually within our Familias en Acción and partner exhibit booths. These resources include mental health, emotional health, sexual health, HIV, and many, many other resources. Over the last year and a half, many of us have jumped into a world of back-to-back virtual meetings. No downtime or even opportunity to shift, focus, or truly be present. There have been times when I myself don't know what meeting I am in until about 20 minutes into that meeting, given that we jump from one meeting right into the next. Today, we want to offer you a moment to slow down, a moment to be present and center ourselves before jumping into our virtual event. We will start our conference with an invitation for you to engage in a guided mindfulness practice. Please welcome our co-host of Abuelas en Acción podcast, a podcast for our common good, Marie Dahlstrom and Dr. Rosemary Celaya Alston.
Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidos a todos to the 12th Annual Latino Health Equity Conference, Me Cuido, Te Cuido. I am Dr. Rosemary Celaya Alston with Marie Dahlstrom, co-host of Abuelas en Acción, a podcast for our common good. On behalf of Familias en Acción, the next 10 to 15 minutes of this conference is an opportunity to give yourself permission to take the time to shine a light into your inner self. Self-care is one of the major building blocks of self-compassion. When we were able to do this, it helps us reinforce the gratitude and blessings we have in our lives, no matter how challenging our journey has been. By promoting a stronger sense of positivity in your life, it will provide you with the fuel to be a more authentic sense of self. As a mentor once shared with me, it is important not to allow your thoughts and worry to live rent-free in your mind. Living a balanced lifestyle isn't something that comes naturally to everyone, but no matter where you are in your life, right now, self-care can be an amazing tool to provide yourself the life-changing feeling of being intentional in your well-being. We are all so much more than just our professional and personal roles or hats that we wear in our lives. When we understand that separating your heart and soul from the rest of your body can create more harm, we will realize that if any of these body parts are hurt, injured, or wounded in any way, we feel it throughout our bodies. We feel it everywhere. Being able to connect and have self-awareness of our minds, body, and spirit, and taking the time just to breathe deeply and be aware of that the only thing that we can control is ourselves. It's natural to want to think about the past or worry about the future, so much so that we lose sight of the right here, the right now. Each moment you experience is a unique gift granted to you. Choose to make the most of it, being fully present. I leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Don't start your day with the broken pieces of yesterday. Every day is a fresh start. Each day is a new beginning. Every morning we wake up is the first day of the rest of our life.
This meditation is for you, the giver, you, the advocate for social and racial justice, you, the advocate for the most vulnerable, you who care so much. As we settle in, let this moment be your time for you. Time with your divine feminine. Time with your sacred space. During this moment for you, feel the abundance and strength of everyone attending our virtual conference. Join together spiritually, so nurturing and affirming. You can feel such love and support. Take a deep and cleansing breath. As you inhale, imagine your breath traveling through your body all the way down to your toes, like a wave. As you exhale, exhale completely and deeply. Slowly inhaling and slowly exhaling. Continue slowly breathing in and out. Feel your muscles relax, your breath moving in and out. You are feeling more relaxed and your mind is becoming still. With every breath, you are feeling more and more relaxed. Imagine walking through a forest. You are walking at night and the moon is shining brightly. You are able to see a path ahead of you. This land is known to you. You feel safe and at peace. In the distance, you hear the soft call of an owl as you make your way deeper and deeper into the forest. As you walk through the forest, feeling the soft earth, you find yourself in a beautiful meadow. The moonlight shines on this beautiful meadow. In the middle of the meadow, you see a circle of stones and a fire burning. As you move closer, you hear a flute playing. You step closer into the middle and you hold your arms out. You feel the warmth of the fire and hear the crackle of the fire. Can you feel the magic in the air? Can you feel the power of this moment? You see a figure across the fire who is playing the beautiful and peaceful music. You feel the wind swirl and the light from the fire dance around you. You are feeling such peace. Feel the wind in your face and hear the movement of the trees. Open all of your senses wide open to this moment. What can you touch? What can you see? What do you hear? What can you smell? What can you taste in this moment? Open your sixth sense. What do you know in this moment? Open and receive all of the gifts in this moment. Allow yourself a gentle smile as you realize how beautiful it feels to receive something just for you. In this moment, you are being offered peace, love, and contentment. Picture yourself opening your arms to let the wind and music lift your soul, cleanse you, renew you. Allow yourself this moment you receive, allowing you to give and to express your unique gifts to the world, honoring your ability to sing beneath the surface, sin palabras, su facultad. With your next breath, gently bring your awareness to your body, to the earth beneath you, to the room around you. Namaste.
Me cuido, te cuido, me recuerda a una frase maya en Latino. Yo soy tú y tú eres yo. Una frase que demuestra que el amor propio ayuda a sanar y a cuidar el mundo.
Me cuido, te cuido to me is a communal effort to be informed of what can impact our mental, physical, and sexual health.
Si cada uno nos cuidamos mejor, vamos a poder ser más fuertes y poder apoyar a las personas en nuestra familia.
What does me cuido, te cuido mean to me? It means taking care of oneself first so that you're well enough to then go on and take care of others.
To me, it means taking care of one another as if you were each other's family, making sure that they feel supported always.
Es una oportunidad de reflexionar y de acordarte de tener un poquito más de compasión para ti mismo y para los demás.
Me cuido, te cuido means that we first need to take care of ourselves to be able to transmit that positive thoughts to the members of our community.
Para mí es un recordatorio de ser paciente conmigo misma y aprender a estar presente.
When individuals have access to medical services, health knowledge, and care, by supporting each other, we are working together as a community. This is what me cuido, te cuido means to me.
El conocimiento conmigo misma para poder ayudar a las otras personas. Cuido a mi familia, cuido a mi comunidad.
Es cuidarme a mí misma primero, porque si yo no estoy bien, no puedo cuidar ni apoyar a los demás.
Me cuido, te cuido means taking care of my physical, mental, and emotional health so I can be the best version of me and contribute to a healthier, happier community. In 2020, we were over 565,000 Latinos living in the state of Oregon, which accounted for roughly 13.4% of the total population, making us Latinos the largest racial ethnic minority in the state. As Latinos, we have many identities. We are immigrants, parents, children, farm workers, educators, students. Our culture is rich and diverse. There are many inequities that go across racial and ethnic lines. These inequities have been highlighted and amplified during the last year. Communities of color, including Latinos, have been the most impacted by COVID-19. Between January of 2020 and April of 2021, there were more than 43,000 cases of COVID-19 among Latinos in Oregon, which represents about 8% of Latinos in the state. We have experienced a lot of loss, but we have also come together as a community to support one another. This year's Latino Health Equity Conference demonstrates how our community continues to come together to fight for health equity. Me Cuido, Te Cuido aims to explore how important it is for us to take care of ourselves in order to take care of our loved ones in our community. We will highlight initiatives led by community groups for decreasing cultural stigmas and barriers around HIV and sexual health. As Latinos in Oregon, our community continues to be impacted by HIV and AIDS. At the end of 2018, there were over 7,600 people in Oregon living with HIV, and more than 1,000 of those were Latinos. It is estimated that 1 in 6 people living with HIV have never been diagnosed, and therefore are unaware they have it. Like COVID-19, when the AIDS epidemic started in the 1980s, HIV was a new virus. The medical community knew very little about it and how to treat it, and a lot of people lost their lives. Today, HIV continues to impact our community, but it is preventable, and fortunately, we have ways to stop it from spreading from person to person. And people living with HIV can live long, healthy lives if they get diagnosed early and get treatment. Ending HIV in Oregon is still a public health priority. Although it is preventable, we still have a lot of health barriers to overcome, including fear and stigma within our own community. Let's come together to fight for improving health equity for Latinos and ending HIV in our community. Welcome to our 12th annual Latino Health Equity Conference, Me Cuido, Te Cuido.
The HIV Day Center has been around for 30 years. It is the first freestanding day center of its kind in the country, and it has been at this location for 20 years in the Concordia neighborhood. The Day Center was originally created for people living with HIV/AIDS to come and have food, have a community space, and share their experience together. On a day-to-day, we see anywhere from 20 to 45 clients. Our clients really have had a chosen family here, a home away from home, and that's one of the most important and wonderful aspects of the Day Center.
I think now during this year, during COVID, that one of the most important things that people have needed is community, and is to be able to have people who understand them and people who see them for who they are and can provide just emotional support on so many levels. So whether that is somebody to share, over the loss of a friend, or if it is somebody to share a silly story of what happened in their day, just all the different aspects of what makes us human. When someone is living with HIV and when somebody also may have other experiences that are difficult in their lives, to be able to have a space where they are seen and where everyone really welcomes them and knows them is incredibly important.
Llegar a un país donde no hablas inglés, donde no conoces a mucha gente, y sobre todo estás enfermo o infectado, es tremendo, ¿no? Para mí eso ha sido el peor reto, el reto más difícil, del no tener un lugar, ¿verdad? Y dado eso, se me es difícil también tomar los medicamentos, ¿no? Porque los medicamentos tienen que ser con comida y todo. Hay veces que, si soy sincero, no tengo que estar prendiendo la lumbre aquí afuera o para poder calentar una sopa. Y después como que te dices, bueno, ¿por qué? O sea, caes en depresión.
Yo ya tengo casi 30 años con el HIV. Yo creo que nadie se va a dar cuenta de que yo soy HIV, nadie. Pero lo que yo siento por dentro es diferente, o sea, el cansancio, la fatiga crónica.
Yo cuando estuve en México boxeé por 7 años. También los golpes en la cabeza, porque me dijeron que era, pues ya no me acuerdo, y me olvidó todo. Pues. Dice que estuve 4 meses en el hospital, yo no me acuerdo. Y ahí fue cuando me dijeron que tenía, después de la operación, HIV, diabetes, aparecí con muchas cosas. Tuve que dejar con mi ex esposa. Pues. Y lo que más extrañaba de todo era mi hija. Pues.
El que no tiene el virus no se preocupa de eso, porque como nosotros tenemos que tomar medicina cada mañana, y si no la tomamos, pues tenemos problemas serios.
Hay gente que critica cruel al que tiene HIV, pues. Y cuando un día de ellos lo pueden tener y no se ponen a pensar en eso también. Pues.
Pero no sabemos si realmente fue por un accidente, fue por una cirugía o fue por una transfusión sanguínea.
Yo pienso que se sigue con el estigma. Si la gente sabe que eres HIV y aparte que eres gay, o sea, por el lado que se van es por el lado sexual. de que dicen, no, pues si lo tienes porque ¿qué hizo, no? ¿Cómo lo agarró? Más no piensan en que si lo tiene, qué necesidades o qué dificultades está pasando. En eso no lo piensan, eso a lo mejor viene ya con más conciencia. Pienso que la mejor manera de poder llevarlo es a lo mejor venir aquí a este lugar, tener un lugar donde estar, donde vernos.
Siempre hay un apoyo, siempre hay una mano o un hombre en quien te puedas apoyar. Ya, gracias a Dios.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Isla Rosen. I am the HIV STI Sexual Health Program Manager at Familias in Acción here in Portland, Oregon. I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker to kick off this year's conference, Moises Agosto Rosario. Moises is the Director of Treatment at the National Minority AIDS Coalition in Washington, D.C. Moises will present the intersection of COVID-19, HIV, and social justice, from the individual to the collective. For the past 30 years, the HIV pandemic has served as a catalyst for a social movement built out of resilience in front of the adversities of racism, homophobia, transphobia, and xenophobia, among others. This session will explore the individual and collective responses to these socioeconomic illnesses through the path of two deadly pandemics. At the end of this presentation, Moises will be available for live Q&A. Please submit your questions through the Q&A chat box throughout the presentation. Now, please give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Moises Agosto Rosario.
Saludos y bendiciones. Me llamo Moises Agosto, como fue la presentación, y soy el director de tratamiento para the National Minority AIDS Council in Washington, D.C. So today, I'm very honored to be part of this conference and be with the community that I belong to as a Latino man living with HIV. I'm honored and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to share with you part of my story, and also being able to, from the individual, from my experience and my experience working with others in the community, how can we navigate the challenges that we have presented to ourselves in terms of battling HIV, in terms of health disparities, and also looking at issues like immigration and social determinants of health that sometimes we have to face. Here, I'm very glad to be with you, and we can start with the slides. Thank you. So as I was said earlier, I'm going to be talking about the intersection of pandemics and social justice, from the individual to the collective. Next. But first, let me just tell you very briefly about NMAC. NMAC is the National Minority AIDS Council, and our mission and purpose is to lead with race, to urgently fight the health equity and racial justice to end the HIV epidemic. NMAC was founded in 1987, and it's one of the #1 leaders in the nation's capital advocating for communities of color. Next. So today, the learning objectives that we will have were, the first one is going to be related to health disparities, and it was already mentioned that the participants will learn about how the intersection of HIV and COVID-19, and also how health disparities bring light to the lack of justice for vulnerable communities. The second learning objective would be in the context of lack of justice, and the participants will learn about how the lack of justice influences the responses to the HIV epidemic at a local, like here in Oregon, and at the national level. And the third one is framed on the context of resilience. And participants will learn and hear about the power of individual and collective resilience and the importance of mentoring a new generation of advocates. Next. So even though that sounded so academic and so formal, I want this to be more of una conversación. Okay, I can talk to you about these issues in a way that you can relate to, and probably the way that I relate to. First, we're going to talk about my personal story briefly. And also, I wanted to provide some sort of a context and history around the AIDS activism that we had in the beginning of the epidemic, and how effective that was, and how that allowed us to be where we are today in terms of having effective treatments. Also, next, I want to talk about identities and stigmas. I will start that conversation from my experience, and then we will expand that conversation in the context of, what exactly is a stigma por VIH, and from there talk about equity and health disparities. And to end, I want to talk about COVID-19, the racial and ethnic disparities, and how we had to face, the intersection of two pandemics starting last year in 2020. So let's begin. Next slide. This is a video, me telling my story that INMAC produced. And I thought that probably would be best if you hear the video and that me trying to tell you the story right now. So that let's see if we can start the video. So my name is Moises Agosto Rosario, and I am the Director of Treatment for INMAC. And I'm 55 years old. And I have been living with HIV for more than 30 years. So the first time I heard about HIV was in 1984, 83, 84. And, and even though in the news you heard at that time about some gay cancer, I wasn't, it wasn't registering too much. So in 1986, I decided that I wanted to get tested, because I had 1 or 2 more years and I wanted to go to graduate school in the United States. And I was told that I was positive. And I was told, very direct, and I just didn't know what to think. And I was like kind of in shock. And he said, so you're positive. There's nothing we can do for you. I remember that. He said, stay healthy as much as you can, exercise, blah, blah, blah. And you could be around for 1 more year. And I was just like a kid, right? So I was in shock until I got home, that I just started to process, and then I started to cry. And I was terrified about who I was going to talk about it, because a stigma was very, very prevalent in Puerto Rico at that time, and still is. The fear was very intense, and the denial at that point was intense too. So I moved to New York, and I knew that part of that experience had to do with finding health care. This is 1988. ACTO started in 87. And when I stepped in, was a room, I get goosebumps every time. The room was full, and full of young people like me, and people that were angry, people that were not apologetic, and I was like, holy cow. And there I was. It was like, I always, and I repeat it every time people ask me, it was like a religious experience. It was like, I found my tribe. Seriously, it was my tribe. The day of desperation was a demonstration
all over the city. We started in the morning, and we had the affinity groups and the Latinos. We took care of like Latino organizations, government officials. Every group had different, and we will meet in the afternoon, and we will block the Grand Central Station. And we taped all around the trains at the time of rush hour. We stopped the whole Grand Central Station. Was very powerful. People came from all over the country. People came from the actors in Europe. We had this big signs coming down of where they have the time of the trains, so the people could not see, and it would say every so minutes, so many people died of AIDS. I cried in that one because it was overwhelming. It was people were screaming at us, I need to take my train, and we will just be like this, not letting people get to the rail. That was powerful to me because we stopped the city, we stopped Grand Central, and also during that time we were dealing, personally, you will be dealing with people dying from ACT UP, your friends from ACT UP, my friends from PWAC, my friends in Puerto Rico, my other friends from Puerto Rico in New York. Then you had to, I was afraid to check my answering machine during that time in New York. If it was not like an ACT UP meeting that we had to plan something, it was about someone that died, service, or someone that needed help, or someone that was new to New York and didn't know what to. I mean, it was that emotional too, but you had to put that. I did repress that a little to just being able to keep going.
I still can't believe that, after 40 years since the first time that the CDC published the information about the first cases with AIDS, that we have come so far. And personally, it still amazes me that I'm still here after 30 something years infected with HIV. And the reason why I wanted to show you that video is because when the epidemic started, it didn't, it was a personal, it was a health crisis for all of us that were affected and infected by HIV. And we have now a very efficient, a big community that has developed services, that have developed ways of providing effective care for people living with HIV. And all of that started, with a group of people living with HIV that decided to meet, decided to establish what was called as the Denver Principles in 1983. And the purpose of the Denver Principles was principles telling the people living with HIV, the community in which they are, and the general public, that nothing could be done without us. That people living with HIV have to be seated at the table, and that we have to be part of any decision that was made at a national level, at a local level, at the city level. We have to be at the table. And, that was such a revolutionary concept, and something that, set the tone for the activism that came out of, this crisis. And, other groups were formed, like, the People with AIDS Coalition in New York, also the activist direct action group called ACT UP. And that's when I referred to ACT UP. That was a group of activists that got together to, through direct action, make sure that the government acknowledged that AIDS was a crisis, and that it was affecting many communities, mostly gay men at that time. The issue why all these efforts had to have to happen was because by that time, which Reagan was the president, he would not acknowledge, that AIDS was a crisis. So the movement in which you are now, started with this kind of efforts. It didn't start with fancy offices. It didn't start, with any other kind of like fancy clinics, or it started in the street. It started with activism. Next. So when I shared the story, and when I moved to New York from Puerto Rico, which I was born and raised, as you know, in Puerto Rico, we all Puerto Ricans. We all from, a mix of, African and Taino, Indian and European and Spaniards. But, the concept of being a person of color was not, you don't learn that. You learn that when you move to the United States. So when I moved to the United States, I have to, there were different identities that started to intersect one with the other. Like I was a Puerto Rican, and I had no idea that Puerto Ricans had a specific stereotype, right? The one like that you see in West Side Story, right? But also, I was a gay man, Puerto Rican gay man. I was a person with HIV, and at some point I was a person with AIDS. I was a person of color. I learned that that was another identity of mine, and that people of color had also a stereotype. I was Latino. Now I'm Latinx. I was a bilingual person. I was an activist. I was, later on a public health professional. Now I'm HIV positive over the age of 50, so I'm becoming an elder with HIV. But also, I'm a queer, and I'm a Joto, and I'm a Pato. Pato is the word used in Puerto Rico for Joto. So, I had to learn to navigate, my life in New York through all these identities, and learn what they meant to the people that I interacted with, what that meant with the people I interacted when I had to look for services, right? When I have to look for a doctor. At that time, there was no treatments for HIV, and there was a lot of stigma and a lot of discrimination against people living with HIV. Next. So I wanted to share this video about stigma because, this is my favorite quote from Ariana Lind. She is executive director of the Ariana Center in Florida. And it's beautiful the way she said that stigma es como el aire. Se siente, pero no se ve. Right? Stigma is like the air. You feel it, but you can't see it. So how from the individual we start learning about stigma within our community. So maybe we can take a look at this video very quickly.
Soy activista.
Soy dueño de negocios.
Yo soy una educadora.
Soy pareja.
Soy un amigo.
Y estoy viviendo con el VIH.
Y vivo con VIH.
Soy VIH positivo.
Junto con más de 1 millón de personas
infectadas en los Estados Unidos.
No estamos solos.
No estamos solos.
No estamos solos.
Detengamos juntos al VIH.
Infórmese. Hágase la prueba. Participe.
Thank you for the video. What I think is very important about the video, that
Good afternoon.
My attention is the fact that these are people living with HIV, and they're telling their community who they are. They're open about their status, right? They're telling you that we count with each other. And I think that it's an important message to bring home once in a while, so we don't forget, right? When we have to face a stigma as a community, this requires us to intentionally and authentically treat each other with respect, and not allowing our judgments to cloud our love for each other and our commitment to make the community a healthy and vibrant community. So here there is a definition of a stigma that I found that I thought that maybe could be useful for some of us to review. Is estigma por el VIH se refiere a las actitudes negativas y suposiciones sobre las personas que tienen el VIH. Se trata del prejuicio que se genera cuando se cataloga a alguien como parte de un grupo que se supone ser socialmente inaceptable. La definición lo dice todo. El estigma es un gran problema que no nos deja ver a las personas por quienes son. Next. Ejemplos de estigma que se ve, que hemos visto en nuestras comunidades, es cuando se cree que solo ciertos grupos de personas pueden contraer VIH. People think that only some kind of type of people get HIV. Cuando se juzga moralmente a las personas que toman medidas para prevenir la transmisión, si alguien decide usar condones, pues se le critica, ¿no? Y se le acusa de ser, de tener muchas parejas sexuales o algo así, ¿no? Y también la última es sentir que alguien merece contraer el VIH because of the decisions that they make related to their life. Next. So from the stigma, I wanted to bridge to the issue of health disparities, but in the context of equity. It's important we identify the health disparities because they show us, right, the issues that we need to overcome and the kind of work that we need to do in order to make sure that there is equity, for us and for everybody. So as you can see in the picture, I love this image because, sometimes equity get confused with equality. Thinking that, if you provide to everybody the same amount of resources, they are going to be able to overcome whatever challenges they have. And in the context of our communities, right, is communities that experience the higher rates of illness and death across a wide range of health conditions, right? So we see these high rates of conditions like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, heart disease in the communities that we work with. And the reason why we see these high rates is as we see here, is that people are not receiving the amount of resources needed to overcome these conditions and prevent them to happen in the first place. So the equity image, this visual language is telling us that, it's not about providing people the same amount of resources. It's about assessing what communities need, what kind of resources each community needs individually, and based on that assessment, provide the resources that the community will need to thrive, right? And it may not be the same that other communities need, and that's what equity means. We provide the resources that the community need in order to, have health, something that we all deserve equally, right? So they all can now see the game of health, because they got the resources that each one needed in order to accomplish that. Then next slide. So, it's important that now that, when we understand what health disparities are about, that we understand what are the things that drive health disparities. And, for those of us that we've been doing this work for a long time, we know that social and economic inequities are the things that drive the fact that we persist in having health disparities. And we see that when we talk about economic stability, a lot of people, that lack employment, a lot of people that may not have, enough income, that they may have a lot of expenses, medical bills. So people that are in disadvantage in terms of economic stability turn to be some of the people that also suffer from health disparity. The same thing you see in terms of neighborhood and physical environment. When people, we call it like a structural factors, meaning that, if the person doesn't have housing, transportation, it's hard for the person to move around the community and, have a job, go to their job, also bring food to the house. Is also the quality of neighborhood in terms of like people having access to playground, people having access to parks in which they can, interact with the community and get some fresh air. So also we see that in terms of like zip codes, and sometimes we see that the communities that are most affected by these inequalities live in, areas that are far away, or in areas in which, they call it like food deserts. There is no quality of food around. So the other very important one is in terms of education. I remember when I first moved to New York, I was teaching in the South Bronx, and I was brought to that school to teach alfabetización en español, because the women that were trying to learn English could not pass the course, and they kept failing. And it was because they didn't know how to write or read in their own language. Something as, common sense, I will say, right? So literacy in terms of the language, if they are bilingual or not, if you move to a country in which, they speak English and you don't, that's, you're going to face barriers in terms of how you can communicate your needs, or people can communicate to you the solutions to any health problem or to any other kind of issue that you may be facing. So literacy, language, early childhood education, or even access to vocational training, and even, higher education as well. We see that people that are privileged tend to be the people that have access, to higher education. Even though now we see, second, third generations, being able to go to universities, that has been, a fight also in terms of equality that this community had to have in the early years. Food, as I mentioned before, if you don't have food security, your health will be threatened. Community safety, social context, when we talk about being able to have a community you can rely on, social integration, that you see and you engage, and the community engage in activities in which they can support each other. Also, they can speak their own language, hear their own music, dance their own salsa, mariachi. But also, like, how do you deal with the stress? That you don't feel isolated, that you don't feel that you don't have a community, those things. And if you add to that, like, exposure to violence and trauma, are, people sometimes come to this country with, a variety of traumas, or maybe, in the process of arriving to this country, they face things that are traumatic. People, for example, in the context of HIV, those that are considered long-term survivors are, facing like post-traumatic stress disorder because they faced a lot of loss at a very early age. And there was a time in which you felt that it was not going to end, that people were going to keep dying around you, and you were not able to help them. And you, if you were positive, felt that probably you were going to be next, right? So all of that trauma, violence toward women, all these issues that happen in the community and on a personal level, they come to surface. And they become part of those inequities and obstacles that don't let us, access the care that we need. Also, like in terms of policy and justice and policing, that we fear about the police in our neighborhoods. If we feel that they are not going to be there to protect us, but they're going to be there to, stereotype us, those things are real. And, last but not least is the healthcare system in this country. It's broken in the sense that it's not universal. It's not equal for everybody. As I said earlier, if you happen to have resources, you will have the best care. If you don't have the resources, you get care, but maybe it's not the best care that you could get. And that's, you know, that is key in terms of social justice and health disparities, you know, because people could say, oh, but there is a clinic there for the Latinos or for, you know, vulnerable communities. But then when you go to get services, you realize that, you know, the comprehensive services that you deserve are not provided, or if they are provided, the quality in which they are given are not the best. And, you know, that is kind of an incentive for people to not come back to get care. And also, you know, it's like you've been treated like a second-class citizen, and that is a problem. Health coverage is a problem. Unless you have money for a good private health insurance, you don't get the best quality care that you can. Now I can say that, you know, in the context of community and community clinic, in which we see that the own community is there and empowered and educated and, you know, committed to provide the best services, you do find, you know, some community-based services and care services that are appropriate and are well given. So culturally appropriate care, that's something that we all know, you know, being able to make sure that you got all the tests that you need, that you can have a conversation with the doctor, is very important. So all of that, you know, also add to that the layer of racism and discrimination that exists in this country, that we know is systematic, and that it's part of the healthcare system. It's like, you know, it's so ingrained in it that is terrifying. And that is what makes it a big challenge, because it's not about only telling people don't be racist. It's just that the whole system respond to structures that were designed, right, under that mind frame of racism, right, and people seen as second-class citizens. So, you know, I wanted to show you this so we start understanding and seeing, you know, what does it mean actually when we talk about health disparities. Next slide, please. So here, just wanted to bring it home in terms of HIV and Latinos, and understand that, you know, not all the Latinos that are infected with HIV are getting the care that they need. And, you know, we know that we have 252,400 Latinos that had HIV in the United States in 2015. And then here you can see the continuum of care in terms of the numbers. From those Latinos that are HIV positives, for those Latinos that are exposed to HIV, we know that there is an 84% of them that are diagnosed. From those that are diagnosed, we have a 59% that have received some sort of care. You know, it's kind of, we can say like half of them almost. And then from that 59%, we have a 49% of people that have stay in care, that have continued coming to the doctor visit and to the appointments and to the blood work, and that are taking their medication as prescribed. And from that, you have like a 50% that have managed to be virally suppressed. And we know the importance of being virally suppressed, because if you are virally suppressed, your immune system is going to, you know, your immune responses will come back. You restore the immune system, right? But if the viral is not completely suppressed, you know, the immune system, you know, it will start to fail, because we are not fighting the virus appropriately. So it is very important. And when you look at that, just only 50% are virally suppressed, you know, that tell you we have so much work to do to make sure that the community viral load that may exist because of the amount of people that know their status, right, and are taking treatments, you know, can have an impact in the whole health of the community. So I think it is important to keep in mind these kind of numbers and how, you know, how they are part of our daily experience in our communities. So next slide, please. So I wanted to also, like, in the context of the Latino community, the challenges, some of the challenges that we face is that, like, 1 in 6 Latinos with HIV, they don't know that they're HIV infected. And, and that becomes, a problem for that person, because if that person doesn't know, we know that person's health is going to decline, and they're at some point are going to develop full-blown AIDS, and they will, face death. And also, in terms of the community, if they don't know it, that they have it, they may be spreading the virus to others without knowing that that is happening. So, it is a challenge, and it is important that we make sure that our community get tested, so we know what people can do in terms of, like, their sex practices, or the way they take care of their own health. The other one is racism. I'm getting an echo. Racism, discrimination, HIV stigmas. I talked about it later. Hold on a second. Okay. We see that. Can you hear me? All right. Okay, great. So, these are challenges that we face. We face racism, we face discrimination, a stigma, as I said before. And, it's a stigma is more than just HIV, as we all know. We get stigma because we are Latinos. We get stigma because we're immigrants. Everybody could have been, face a stigma in one way or another in this community, and that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be with HIV. Homophobia, the same, right? HIV, the community within our Latino community, the subgroup that is most affected by HIV are men that have sex with men. Gay men, Latino gay men are the ones that are at most risk, and the ones that we're seeing, rates of infections going up. So we really have to pay attention to this community in the sense that provide them with support, with services, with testing, with medicines, and put the discrimination against gay people aside, because every gay man has a father and a mother, and mothers and fathers has gay sons or daughters. So we need to overcome that kind of discrimination en nuestra propia casa, no? You limpias tu casa primero, right? So we have to be conscious about that, and make an intentional effort to overcome that at a personal and at a community level. The other challenges, is the rates of sexually transmitted diseases, something that we don't get to talk about very much because people are afraid to talk about it. But, I think it's time, as I said, to overcome those kind of judgments and understand that anyone that is sexually active is at risk to having a sexually transmitted disease. If you're not protecting yourself, that could happen, right? But it happened, and it could be a problem that anyone can have. So also poverty, migration patterns, the lower educational level, language barriers, all these things, including the lack of good health system, become challenges for us. Next. So this is like a 3-minute video that talk about the Latino community and the invisibility that we face in this country. Let's go for it. All right. If this is not working, let's move on to the next slide, please. All right.
Recognized HIV crisis. Both new HIV diagnoses and estimated new infections have increased for Hispanics and Latinos, while decreasing for other racial and ethnic groups. These alarming trends are best understood by considering the specific Hispanic and Latino populations most heavily affected by HIV and AIDS. Men who have sex with men account for approximately 8 in 10 new HIV infections among Hispanics and Latinos, and represent the steepest increases in estimated HIV incidence. 1 in 4 Hispanic and Latina transgender females in the US is estimated to be living with HIV. And approximately 1 in 3 Hispanic or Latino newly diagnosed with HIV was born outside the continental US. Available data suggests the majority acquired HIV in the United States. Much of the epidemic is geographically concentrated in 7 states and Puerto Rico. However, there are geographically concentrated clusters with higher than average HIV diagnoses among Hispanics and Latinos throughout the country. Existing tools for HIV prevention and treatment are not adequately reaching Hispanics and Latinos most in need. More than half of Hispanics and Latinos have never tested for HIV, and approximately 1 in 6 of those living with HIV are unaware of their status. Hispanics and Latinos account for 1 in 4 new HIV infections, but only for 1 in 8 PrEP users. Further, 2 out of 5 Hispanics and Latinos living with HIV do not receive HIV care. Of those who do receive care, 1 in 5 are not retained in care. Roughly half of Hispanics and Latinos living with HIV do not achieve viral suppression. So, why does any of this matter for ending HIV in the United States? Hispanics and Latinos are the largest and youngest racial ethnic minority group in the United States. By 2060, the U.S. Hispanic and Latino population is projected to double, and 1 in 4 people in the U.S. will be Hispanic or Latino. In response to the U.S. HIV epidemic among Hispanics and Latinos, more than 100 Hispanic and Latino health and social service organizations nationwide convened a community consensus building process. 4 priority recommendations to reduce Hispanic HIV disparities were identified. 1. HIV stigma reduction in Hispanic and Latino communities. 2. Increasing availability and accessibility of HIV prevention and treatment for Hispanics and Latinos most in need. 3. Increasing Hispanic and Latino HIV research and targeted funding. 4. Engaging diverse Hispanic and Latino community leaders and stakeholders to increase national public health efforts. For more information, download our infographic. You can also help spread the word by using the hashtag #InvisibleCrisis and sharing this video.
Thank you. Next slide. I mean, I think that video summarizes the crisis and the invisibility and the consequences of that invisibility that the Latino community faced in the context of the HIV epidemic. So now I wanted to go and talk about, continue to talk about racial and ethnic disparities, but talk about in the context of COVID-19. I wanted to just highlight, the brief overview of the COVID-19 related racial and ethnic disparities. And these will sound familiar to you. For example, risk of exposure to COVID-19 because of things like discrimination in the neighborhood, physical environment, lack of housing, occupation, lack of income, wealth gaps, put the sum of the racial and ethnic minority groups at higher risk of being exposed to COVID-19 compared to the other communities. The second one is the risk of severe illness once you've been exposed to COVID-19. Again, such as, the discrimination, access to healthcare, lacking access to healthcare, and use it, general health status, and that means people that already have some comorbidities or conditions like diabetes or cardiovascular disease. Also, again, we talked about the wealth gaps and the discrimination that exists. These also increase, the severe, increase the possibility of a severe illness when you are infected or exposed to COVID-19. Next one. Next slide. Okay, thanks. So disparities in COVID-19 illness, data on the disproportionate representation of sexual and ethnic minorities group. We see that the majority of the patients that have been affected by COVID-19 are vulnerable communities: African American, Native American, Latinos, Asian Pacific Islander. Also, we see these disparities on hospitalizations related to COVID. There are different rates of hospitalization, demographic, and like the way it manifests, clinical characteristic, medical conditions, as I just mentioned, and the outcomes, the admission to the intensive care unit, and also the need for mechanical ventilation. All of this, you can see that are patients that vulnerable communities belonging to the different race and ethnicity is more vulnerable. The next one, in terms of the death, also we see that in data that there is a disproportionate representation of racial and ethnic minorities group among the people that die from COVID-19. So just the thing is that when you look at this, you realize and you feel and that these are the same reason we see the same disparities among racial and ethnic groups in the context of HIV. Next. And then two more, and that, in terms of unintended consequences, mitigation strategies, they have been disproportionately, this group affected by these minority groups. And then, things like mental health, bereavement, food insecurity, unemployment, loss of healthcare, housing instability that this community face, are, unintended consequences to, have these communities been affected so much. And then, health equity, if we're facing this, disparities, this not only for COVID-19 and HIV, any pandemic that we may face in the future, we will face the same kind of challenges. Next. So I just wanted to provide a visual about, how these two pandemics overlap, or how they share the kind of same structural pathways, racism pathways. You see HIV, you see COVID-19, and you see like income, homelessness, unemployed, residential segregation, health insurance and access to health care, incarceration, provider bias, federal laws, local police, all these structural racism pathways affect people, that are faced with either COVID or HIV, which is, the same communities. Next. Very quickly, just, wanted to highlight two articles that I found that were very telling about, how much and how disturbing is to see how we see the same communities of color affected and in these two epidemics, and how we have, in the case of COVID, the same pathogen or virus, and we see with HIV and how COVID and HIV remain prevalent among communities of color, and how racism, and this article conclude that how racism and discrimination put these communities at greater risk for COVID-19, and also has been putting these communities at greater risk for HIV for the past 40 years. And that achieving, when we talk about ending the epidemic, which is a very common discussion that we have now, we have to also look at that we need to take care of health disparities. We need to look at more equity and work with the health system, to make sure that it doesn't, these communities don't get so severely affected. Great. And, in terms of the conclusions, as I said, next one. I'm sorry. So the next, is an article that Tony Fauci published through the NIH, in which, talking again how the juxtaposition of the two pandemics has exacerbate health disparities, with this group. There, people that were already facing HIV, how their HIV management has been exacerbated by this, and that, how COVID-19 has significantly affected or impacted people in terms of like interfering with them, receiving the healthcare they need, even, if it's to go to the pharmacy and get their HIV meds, or if it's to go and get their PrEP, or have doctor's appointment, have blood work done at a reasonable time. COVID-19 had come to, check that kind of a structure and make it even more challenging for people with HIV in terms of accessing the care they needed at this time during this past year. And, also, when we look at comorbidities and we look at, how comorbidities like diabetes, cardiovascular has been also very prominent, and how people with these comorbidities are more vulnerable to get, severe illness from COVID-19, we have to think about, not just one intervention that kind of comprehensively address, all these symptoms from a system that has failed to serve these communities. So I remember when I worked particularly with a group of HIV 50 plus individuals, these people, 50 plus aging with HIV, and it was very scary for them. And, and I can put my name there too, just to know that you fought HIV for 30 years or more, and that suddenly, if you're not careful, you could go to the street and get a virus that could kill you, in a matter of days. So it was, for people with HIV, was a vulnerable time, was a very unstable time mentally and emotionally, and it generated a lot of stress. And, I'm glad that we are where we are in terms of the vaccine. And I hope that also, we are going to, as a community, have to make an effort to make sure we are vaccinated, and that we educate the community about the advantages of the vaccine, and that we make sure that those vaccines are available for people to take advantage of the protection they can get with the vaccine. And that's, that's another issue that come affected by what we have all discussed through this presentation in terms of health disparities. Next. And I think this is the last one. Just as a conclusion, just a couple of points that I wanted to make. We will not end HIV, COVID-19, or any other future pandemic until health disparities are eradicated and dealt with. And that, until we have access to high quality health, and that is equal to all racial and ethnic groups. Until we don't fix that, it's going, we're still continue to face disparities, and they will be exacerbated as we get other pandemics, which, most probably we will get. That's part of evolution. So, community engagement, organizing, and actions are essential, and are an essential component in our as a Latino community, our fight for social justice. We know that HIV, in the context of social justice, is one more issue that we're fighting for. So it's important that we as a community own the solution, and that we engage with the community, and that we take actions intentionally to mitigate and to overcome these terrible challenges that our community face with all these these two pandemics and the health disparities. The third one is, uno empieza por la casa, and stigma has been identified like the #1 problem among the Latino community. And we must have, stigma must have no place in our community. We should all care for each other. We should not judge each other. We should love each other. Hoy por ti, mañana por mí. Es como me cuido y te cuido. Anyone could be affected by any disease, and anyone deserves, proper respect and proper value as a human being, as a life. So stigma needs to be out. We need to throw that out of the window and away from our community. And it starts with us. The last one is change start with the individual. And that's when I refer from the individual to the collective. It's my intentions to overcome life challenges. It's my intentions to get well. It's my intentions to, relate with my family and help my family relate to me and understand my value as a human being with everything that I am. And the family is the community, and that as a community, as a family, that individual, accomplish health when it gets involved in a power that is greater than self, right? Working in the community, doing work for the community is doing work also for yourself. And you being part of something that is bigger than you, and that because it's bigger than you, it will take care of you, as long as you're part of it. So that's my presentation. I'm sorry if I took a couple of minutes more than agreed. And here is my information for those of you that will be interested. I work in MMAC, and it's actually Agosto@mmac.org. That was my mistake. And anyway, you will find me anyway, and I think that you could have access to the slides if you want to. With that, I thank you all for listening to me, and I hope that my words can help you to navigate the times, and the things that we need to do in our community.
Everyone for submitting your questions. My name is Isla Rosen. I'm the HIV/STI Sexual Health Program Manager here at Familias en Acción. So we will now transition into the Q&A portion of this presentation. If you do have questions, feel free to enter those into the Q&A tab to the right of your screen, and we will have time for at least a few questions today. So I'm going to look at our questions and see what we have here. It looks like we have a question for Moises. What is the biggest reason why COVID-19 impacted the Latino community other than the lack of services?
I think that when we look at health disparities, I have to go back to health disparities. Lack of services I think it's the combination of challenges that this community face, right? It's like, that's why we put them all together in the health disparities place, right? It's lack of services, but also, it's lack of care, it's lack of education, or people feeling that they will be fine if they don't wear a mask. It's also probably lack of communication in their language they understand. It's probably people feeling that, when, like an example, when I was in Puerto Rico and I was young, I used to say that HIV was a gringo problem. That wasn't my problem, right? So it's like removing myself from the issue. But it's issues and challenges that happen with the individual in terms of understanding that, it could happen to the individual, but also is the resources this individual have in order to prevent and have, let's say, something as simple as money for masks, keeping, some people didn't even have that, right? And they have to be creative. So there is a combination of different factors that, when they come all together, they exacerbate, the risk and the exposure of this being of COVID-19. So it's more than just services, and it's all those things that encompass comprehensive prevention and care.
Thank you. It looks like we have a few other great questions here, so let's try to get through maybe one or two more. What is the role of non-Latinx allies in helping to end stigma towards HIV in the Latinx communities?
Perfect. The role of non-Latinx ally to end stigma, I think it's like the best way you teach something is by example, right? I think that, sometimes, there is people that like to lecture about a problem, and you should not have a stigma, you should not. But, sometimes people close their ears around, that kind of lecturing, right? But sometimes you need to lecture. But what I'm saying is that those that are not part of the community, I think it's important for you to be respectful of the community, right? And clearly understand the causes of a stigma within this community, right? They will be different probably from other communities. We have a different culture. We have a way in which we have been raised. We tend to be very religious community, very influenced by, Catholic church and other kind of church. So for those that are not part of the community, it's important to provide the support, to lead by example, and to help the individuals in the community to realize when a stigma is happening, because I think that sometimes some people are not even aware that they are acting on like with a stigma towards someone, or that someone is being discriminated because of the stigma. It's like Ariana said, right? Stigma is like the air. You don't see it, but you feel it. And sometimes people, when they feel that, they're not sure about what it is. But if we can, each other, the allies and those, even those within the community, make sure that we understand what it is, that we understand the consequences and how much they can hurt, and also get in the middle of a person to be healthy and happy. I think that that's the best way to support.
Thank you, Moises. Okay, one more question. What are some of the advocacy initiatives that you're working on through your role at NMAC? What can we see coming from the national level?
Yes, right now in terms of advocacy, we are working with this administration to make sure that there was a minority AIDS initiative that was created in Congress many years ago, and the initial purpose of that was to provide direct funding for minority-led organizations. Somehow in the way from the 2000s to where we are and the last administration, there were changes in that law that didn't, that then they put language that said people that provide services to minority community, and the problem is that then the funding didn't go to the minority organization, but went to white organization providing services to people of color, which I don't believe would be the best way to influence a community. So we have now working with the administration to make sure that the initial purpose of that law comes back. And that means, new streams of funding for minority community and their organizations. Also, we're working in terms of the aging population, and we're working with the Senate Committee on Aging to have a congressional hearing on the needs of people aging with HIV. This is the first time we see people with HIV going over the age of 50 and aging, and we don't know the kind of services that this community need. So we're working on that as well. And those are two of the main highlights. And also ending the epidemic, making sure that all of our communities are represented and active part of the process for ending the epidemic.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to answer the questions from our attendees. So again, thank you for sharing your wisdom, experience, and passion for advocacy with us and for kicking off our 12th annual Latino Health Equity Conference. I hope you all enjoyed this presentation. It was a pleasure to have you here with us. We will see you back at our first breakout session, which will be at 1:15 Pacific time. So that gives you about 15 minutes to go and check out some of our community resources from our exhibitor halls. Also, if you didn't get a chance to attend our event on June 20th, Quinceañera, in honor of 15 years of PDX Latinx Pride, be sure to check it out through the exhibit hall. It is a beautiful compilation of performances and interviews with previous and current community leaders and artists of PDX Latinx Pride, previously known as Latino Gay Pride. This concludes our opening and keynote presentation. Thank you for attending, and we will see you back in about 15 minutes.